We're welcoming back Loh Pei Ying to our podcast. We last saw her in season 2, I think.
Yeah.
Right? That was about 2 years ago in 2023. We spoke to you about just the basics of like data and how should we all be looking at it. I confessed, and I still confess, that the word data scares me a bit because like it feels like, do I know enough about this thing? Yeah, but since then, I think you have gone off, you have pursued like further education in it, and I wanted to invite you back so that you could catch us up. What have you been up to since we last saw you?
Yeah, thank you for having me back on here. And I can't believe it's been only 2 years, but I feel like so much has changed.
Yeah.
So I did, actually I was very inspired by that last podcast, I have to say, but following that, I decided that actually there were harder questions about data that I needed to clarify. And I think I also suffered from some degree of imposter syndrome because my bachelor's degree was actually in history. I studied history at the National University of Singapore, and I don't actually have any practical taught data skills. I learned it on the job, but I was always quite hesitant to call myself like a proper professional because I didn't learn, like Python or data analytics or data science. So I decided to further my education by doing a master's degree in that direction. I was very fortunate to have received funding from the Chevening Scholarship that's given out by the UK Foreign Office. And that allowed me to study a year in the University of Edinburgh at the Futures Institute in data, inequality, and society.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like not one thing, it's 3 things. Because I think most courses out there cover some sort of computational, like they focus on computational elements, or they focus on the data science element, or they usually focus on data science for, say, economic purposes, or socio-economic studies, social science, so on and so forth. And I think I was really drawn to this because it was the first one that I think addressed every single element of what I identify with and what was important to me.
Yeah.
And it was very much a conversation about how data and inequality comes together in all its ways. So it's not just about, data as an unequal piece of knowledge, but also how it can use to inform us about inequalities, basically at the intersection of both. And I do think the school that designed this course set it up very intentionally that way.
So I'm going to play the role of the listener who is a bit of a data dummy, because I would also self-identify as feeling a little bit of that. So walk us through again a simple layman's understanding of data, so they don't freak out when they hear the word data, like, oh, okay, this is very sciencey, I don't know anything about this. What is data?
So I mean, I will have to go and I am quite sure of this, but I have to go and look it up again. But I guess like data it stems from Latin origin, but essentially there are, I think, two major definitions of data. One, data as just a reference to some general knowledge, right? So we often, like in conversations, we'd be like, do you have the data for that? Meaning also like a reference to evidence, right? Do you have information on that? Do you have evidence for that? So we use data as shorthand for that. So data just means knowledge, right? It can be textual data, it can be qualitative data. But I think the version of data that everyone is intimidated by is the idea of computerized data, or data that must be read by computer systems. So that is the more, I guess, widely known, more widely referred to definition of data. So also usually used in reference to big data. So something that you can't just comprehend with your own mind. You need software to help you. So you need Excel, or you need Python, or you need, some sort of formula to help you gain an understanding from it. You can't just look at it row by row and be able to understand what's going on.
So give us a quick layman understanding of what does data have to do with this inequality thing that you're studying then?
I don't know if I can make it layman, but I'll try and make it, I guess, understandable in terms of like where my journey with data has come from, and where a I'm headed towards with it, I think.
Yeah.
So I guess for the purposes of this podcast, I'm the head and co-founder of a data storytelling studio called Kontinentalist.
Yeah.
In the first, I would say, 5 years of our organization, of our work, we have always been data focused and data storytellers.
Yeah.
And we have identified ourselves as people who bridge the gap between the research sector, the people who produce the data, and the public. So we are that last mile communication of people who produce data and the public, and making that data more comprehensible. And we have also always decided that we wanted to do that as an impetus for change, right? So we're not just doing any data. We are communicating for the purposes of making the world, I would say, hopefully a better place.
Yeah.
Our goal in the past was to put what we call Asia at the forefront of global conversations. And I think we saw data as a tool then, right? As a tool, and also as a very legitimate and unquestioning form of perfect knowledge.
Okay.
Right. So it's this idealized form of knowledge. We understand that data has power dynamics in it.
Yeah.
But we still see it as extremely accurate. It's a undeniable, indisputable piece of knowledge. For some reason, when it's in Excel spreadsheets, it becomes, this like mathematical equation that is very hard to deny as false. And we felt that was an excellent vehicle for storytelling, right?
Okay.
And for change, because then you present the facts, right? You present hard facts, present evidence, and that should be a good vehicle for persuasion. So that's where we came from. And I think a lot of that has changed on two fronts, both on the data front and also the stories front, and what the stories are for.
Okay.
So I think on the data front, we have decided that actually data is not perfect. In fact, it's very much the opposite of that. It's very imperfect. It's very uncertain, especially if you start to dig into how it's collected, how it's framed, who's doing the collecting, so on and so forth. We covered this a little bit in the previous podcast as well, but I think we learned more about it now. And I think what really changed is the second half, which is the story half. And I think for us, we have realized that even wielding stories also comes with a high degree of power. Yeah. And we want to make sure that we're using that correctly. And we also then begin to ask ourselves, like, are we the right people to tell these stories?
Right.
And is the necessary intervention another story? Okay. Right? Like, is this issue that requires another story, or maybe something else? So we have changed our mission and vision in that direction as well.
Okay, so it sounds like whatever you were studying up in Edinburgh influenced like this new shift, right, in Kontinentalist.
Yeah.
So is that something that was that shift in approach something that is just you, or like your whole team also came to its own like this resonates with us a lot more?
Yeah, I think we came on parallel journeys. Okay. So like, I hope I don't ramble on too much about this, but basically, I mean, I think a lot of things happened while I was away. So I'll start with my journey first, and then I'll talk about my team. So obviously I went away to Edinburgh to study for a year, and I was working part-time, full-time student, part-time running Kontinentalist. So I was still in touch with my team. At Edinburgh, one of the key classes that I took that really, I would say, blew my mind. And like, I would say in a way even broke my mind.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I was like, in a daze for a while, but and you do get that sort of earth-shattering moment where you realize a lot of the things that you've largely regarded as true, or you held certain beliefs about something, and to have that completely be undone is quite traumatizing. So, we've had to sort of put that back together. Yeah. But that class was called Coloniality of Data. Okay. And it was really about not just understanding how data is imperfect, but also how the entire world that we live in is very shaped by colonialism, including how we think and how we live and how we behave. So, I mean, the more like chim words for it is like ontology, like, like how your beings are affected by knowledge as well, and how that's very much shaped by colonialism. So then it became really difficult for me to square that with like the work that we did before. So it was a necessary change to come back and sort of I couldn't unsee what I have seen,
Yeah,
right? So I had
yeah.
to try and implement that and make sense of that. But I think at the same time, my team was going through a parallel journey of the war in Gaza really made a huge difference mentally to them. I
Yeah.
mean, we felt that dissonance also in some of our previous work.
Yeah.
But I think the war in Gaza made things very, very obvious of what is the point of stories, right?
Okay.
Like we are telling these stories, but it doesn't seem to change anything.
Okay.
Like we claim and we hope that we are changing people's minds, but it doesn't change anything materially.
Yeah.
It also, there was the discomfort with distance, meaning we are based in Singapore. We lead, I mean, honestly, quite privileged lives. We're very comfortable. We don't live in the lives of the people that we tell stories about, right? We don't actually live in those contexts. And for us, we can tell a story, and then when we're done with a story, we can, sort of set it aside and not think about it anymore. But the people who live in that context sort of carry that with them all the time.
Yeah.
So it also came to us of like, okay, what is the point of telling these stories?
Yeah.
Who are we, as I said, to tell these stories? And are we actually making a real difference with them?
Okay.
Yeah. So I think those two parallel experiences sort of came to a conjoined area when I returned back to work last September.
Yeah. So what do you think has been the biggest change in the approach? Because you are still doing, Kontinentalist is still doing the work of storytelling based on data.
Yeah.
So what has changed very significantly about the approach? Yeah.
I would say on the outside, on the wrapping, I think Kontinentalist looks very much the same. But I think internally it's quite an overhaul of how we work, how we think.
Yeah.
On the most fundamental basic level, the things that I've learned about not just decolonization, but also feminism has really informed the way we structure our team.
Yeah.
And the way we have our processes set up and the way we look at work in general, right? So we try to also differentiate ourselves from not just other companies, but also other studios. So I think Kontinentalist has always believed in like collaborative decision-making processes, but this time we are really taking it to another level. We're still in the process of setting up different teams. We used to be very skills focused, meaning our teams are set up as like, editorial, development, and design, right?
Yeah.
The sort of components required to build a story. And we saw individuals in the team as people of technical expertise.
Yeah.
But now we have restructured that to be interdisciplinary teams. So instead we have community and business development, we have process and product, and then we have research and experimentation. There is still a degree of technical skill composition, but the technical skill becomes secondary, and instead who are in these teams are led by their own choices and their own decisions. I've let the team choose what team they want to be a part of based on their individual interests and passions, and not what specific skills they can bring to the table.
Okay.
And that is sort of recognizing both intersectionality and inclusiveness, and also giving them that voice and choice of what is important to them. But then also taking a view that we need to set these individuals up for success. So it's not just giving someone else a new job and then saying, okay, now, go ahead. But also being very intentional in thinking, what actually do you want to achieve in your job? What skills do you require? And what can the company do, or what can your team do to ensure that you are set up for success?
Yeah.
And I think that's a differentiation between other organizations that have DEI policies that sort of see inclusivity as filling ranks with as many diverse people as possible, but not really also equipping them with the mental and safety support to make sure that they are, staged for success rather than failure. So that's one of the key developments that have changed.
Right.
We have also changed our mission and vision. So in the past, we were very stories focused. So we saw stories as the intervention required to solve, social misunderstanding or gaps, in public understanding. But I think now, and then we also saw ourselves as the conduit for, so we describe ourselves as bring Asia to the forefront of global conversation. So it's very outward looking, mostly to the Western world, one would even say. And instead of actually talking back to Asia.
Okay.
So now we have changed it to, we see our work as we are trying to advocate for a more equitable world. And our role is to foster connections between Asia's sources of knowledge. So we're not bringing stories to anyone, but we are trying to sort of foster these connections. And instead of seeing also stories as the only solution, we have decided to say we offer data and human experiences.
Okay.
So that has freed up our work from being just a publication-focused organization, but also a digital-focused one, but to one that now we can do stories in different formats as well. So we can do exhibitions, we can do infographic design, we can do events. And events is like one of the big things that has also changed for us in the last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like I want to circle back to those two very big words you used, and not everyone is familiar with those words. The feminism and colonialism, or decolonialism, and so number one, not familiar with the terms, and number two, not familiar with what does this have to do with like data and how we tell stories based on it.
I'll begin with that. And honestly, both feminism and decolonial thinking or decolonization shares a lot of common threads.
Okay.
Because both of them are essentially theories of belief or perspectives of our world in a systemized way. So we think of the world as a system or of a composition of systems that we have to sort of undo. Feminism, as everyone would sort of generally know, is just, a fundamental belief that men and women or, genders should be equal in society. But it's the conversations around feminism are often locked between the difference of like, what do we mean by equity versus equality? Do we mean, equality in terms of opportunity, or do we mean equality in terms of skill set or, being, I think, judged, I guess, in society or in the ability to achieve something, right? So like that is sort of the more common framing or the more common understanding of feminism.
Okay.
And all of those things are true, but I think for me, the feminism take that we have applied to the team comes at intersectionality, which is, in a very lay way, is I think people usually think of intersectionality as sort of your different identity markers or like different aspects that make up who you are. Be it you are Chinese, like for me, I'm Chinese. Woman, educated sort of. So there's different identities or different things that sort of make up my identity.
Yeah.
And those individual components affect me differently, right? So many people understand intersectionality as where sort of these compound and make life difficult for certain people. So for example, if you are queer, woman, minority in Singapore, then your life will be very, very difficult, right? Because it's a compounded sort of understanding of how those identities affect you. But actually what intersectionality really means is that you have a very unique set of maybe advantages or disadvantages that get ascribed to you based on the composition of your identities. Yeah. So it's a recognition that there are many forces at play, one that cannot be sort of blueprinted or templatized, right? It can't just be like, oh, if you are minority, then, this sort of standards apply. If you are a woman, then this sort of standards apply. And then it should somehow miraculously resolve itself, right? The composition of those two elements bring out very unique challenges. Likely also, like, for example, if you're a religious, minority woman, then there are very, very unique challenges that face you that any general woman out there won't experience. So there are many of these considerations that need to be taken into account. So that applies to both how we look at our team and also how do we look at our work.
Right.
But how does it apply to data? It applies to how data is used and collected, right? Because we often think of people as categories, much like these identity markers. Okay. And that sort of blinds us from looking at the complete picture sometimes. When we sort of limit our understanding of data into defined categorizations, we also limit ourselves from understanding people in a more fully composed picture.
So do you have an example of like a story where it made a difference that we thought of it in an intersectional way?
There are many sort of books out there commenting about the intersection between feminism and data, or how feminism makes us look at data differently. One of them is Data Feminism. It's a wonderful book and I highly recommend it to everyone. But for Kontinentalist specifically, a few years ago, we worked on a story called A Woman's World.
Okay.
It was a partnership with a South Asian-based publication called Kabal Lahiriah. And together with them, we worked with, I think, 12 different women's organizations all over South Asia and Southeast Asia. And our question was really like, we didn't want to just talk about women's safety, which is a very frequently talked about topic. It is important, women's safety. But we often also only look at we look at women's issues as a problem to be solved. We never looked at women's issues as what are the opportunities to also celebrate women or give them happiness, right? So the story was very much about how can we also understand how women access leisure and joy. So it's not just safety, but what is critical for them to achieve leisure and joy, which we see as essential components of life, or of living a good life, right? So we gave them the choice to define how they want their data to look like. So instead of coming with preset categories where we sort of apply a standardized list of questions to all these different contexts and situations and countries that we are looking at, we asked them to facilitate. We worked with local groups and give them the opportunity to facilitate their own conversations. And then it's our job to find the common threads in their responses. One of those things also in our visualization is sort of, instead of counting their experiences to an average, so one of the questions was also like, how far do you have to travel to access leisure?
Yeah.
And instead of just, averaging that to say like, in India, on average, it's like this amount, we actually created a graphic that shows every single data point and the granularity of that data. Because then you can see that some women, they only travel, like majority of people travel less than 100 kilometers or even maybe less than 50 kilometers. But there's like one woman who has to travel really, really, really far, to travel to access leisure. And she shouldn't be forgotten just because we decide to standardize or average or so on and so forth, right? So intersectionality sort of means this.
So it's that desire to validate like every individual story, every individual voice, every individual like data point.
Yeah.
Is
I
worthy.
guess it's the belief that there might be common threads, but it's the belief that every individual in the world is a unique individual, that they are inherently a different person, a unique person. But it doesn't also mean that they're like we don't want to accidentally essentialize people, right? Like when people only see through their identity markers, it can be, again, a very limiting view. So we want to be able to give an opportunity to see beyond that. Yeah.
I mean, as I'm listening to you, like sort of like deconstruct the story that you just did, it makes me think of like what is the place of like dignity in data, right? Like, can data be used in a way that dignifies the people who gave the data? Yeah, or the people who have wishes about what would you do with this data? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that takes us to the decolonization category a bit more. I mean, feminism is also very much a conversation about power, like who has the power, right?
Yeah.
And I guess more of a criticism specifically towards patriarchies.
Yeah.
But decolonization takes on a more, I would say, global, universal view, and which is why I believe the both of them share a lot of these traits. But very often, I guess I have to trace back to how colonization affects data.
Yes.
And this is something I learned in coloniality and data, that particular class I was referring to.
The brain-breaking class.
Yeah, the brain-breaking class,
Okay.
yeah. And I think it's like again, I mentioned that society today has this unquestioning sort of stance on data. We do think of data as an idealized form of knowledge, as a perfect form of knowledge. But actually data is extremely crude. It's like crude. I think a lot of people has commented about how data is the new oil, and there's a reason for that. Like, it's a really crude sort of form, a very crude product in the way it's created and what its purpose is for. So that, for example, just tracing the history of, if you type into Google and you search the word data, Google does this really nifty feature where they show you the history of how frequently a word is mentioned in our history, because they are able to they've done this thing where they've like scanned a lot of books, so they can trace where the word data starts to appear. And it really is something that's only come up from, like, I guess, the 19th century onwards. So data shares a very close history with the pursuit of scientific knowledge, starting with, like, the Enlightenment era, and also colonization. Those three things sort of happen one after the other, or very close patterns, right? Like when we think of colonization, scientific knowledge was also very much a hand-in-hand pursuit of colonization, right? Like in Singapore, we will see that in the setup of the Botanic Gardens. The Botanic Gardens wasn't the gardens for leisure. It was the gardens for scientific knowledge. It was for the colonial empire to research and test plants they have collected across the empire to see what will be great for, I guess, economic opportunity, right? Cash crops. So rubber, coffee, pepper, these are all products of scientific pursuit. And then, collecting bird specimens and studying them in a specific way, and categorization of that. These whole fields came together. And then from scientific knowledge also came social science, as we know it today, right? So then instead of studying the natural world, so to speak, we turn that study to human beings, right? So we look at, indigenous groups, and we look at, culture as a form of, as some sort of separate form that we can study, like different from us, the person who is doing the studying, right? They are like, if you think of anthropologists, I guess that's the most like accurate description of what's happening, right? You go to, some sort of rural community somewhere else in the world, and you are you live outside of their environment, but you become a spectator and an observer to what's going on. And you describe them in the way as scientists would describe the behavior of, like, the animal world, the animal kingdom, or how plants behave, and so on and so forth, right?
Right.
That framing is really uncomfortable when it's applied to humans, right? Because then they become objectified.
Yeah.
And you're looking for some sort of essentialist quality of, like, oh, because they live in this culture, they behave this way, and they are, like, different from us, inherently different from us, because they behave very differently. And you start to describe them a certain set of behaviors. And at the roots of anthropology, like I guess also I guess maybe at the turn of the century, the 20th century, a lot of scientists did this. Like they were also, and there's evidence of it in Singapore also with the study of orang laut, for example. They actually measured like the size of the skulls of people's heads, whether or not that made a difference to their intelligence, for example. So there's a lot of this like very uncomfortable framing, but somehow
did that happen in Singapore?
Yeah.
They measured.
They
my goodness gracious!
The average size of one of the orang laut individuals, their head, and they would comment on the size and their height and things like that. So it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
and it's somehow like, because if we can study their features, then we can begin to describe them, and then if we describe them and know them, we can somehow control them, right? We can ascribe them certain behaviors, certain traits that now they become a form of study. And that's what colonialism does, right? It seeks to create knowledge, and somehow that creating process or that knowledge then becomes legitimized through these processes, right? So they don't just say things, right? We applied methodology to it, a scientific methodology.
Okay.
And this methodology gives our knowledge legitimacy. And now that my knowledge is legitimate, I can wield it to say a lot of things and enact policy decisions and do all sorts of things, right? And that is what universities are today, right?
Okay.
And also, like, I guess, government institutions, whether or not they have the same goal as these colonial administrators in the past, right? But they share the same sort of process.
Okay.
And that does affect data as well, because data comes into the same process. Like, for example, if the government wants to understand, how does Singapore feel about COVID, or how do Singaporeans feel about the hike in GST. Okay, then we go out and do a survey. We have a set list of questions where we will ask household, and based on, income descriptors or geographic descriptors or certain sort of, gender descriptors, we can begin to make assumptions or trends about people. Women tend to say this, men tend to say that. People who are, making more money will behave a certain way, and people who are making less money will behave a certain way. We begin to ascribe general understanding to them based on how we have framed the data and how the questions that we want to ask. But those are, again, very limited views of understanding the world. It doesn't give an opportunity for other things to show up.
So it's a decolonialized approach to data about the knowledge worker reflecting on what might be the bias that they bring into the work, or what is the effect of them sort of standing apart from the work as if they are superior to the thing that they are studying. Is that part of it?
Yeah. I think now a lot of, from what I've observed, the sort of like other people doing academic studies or even like, in government institutions or think tanks or so on and so forth, like they would sort of caveat to acknowledge their positions, like somehow I think there's a belief that if we acknowledge our biases and our positions, that might somehow absolve the imperfections that might result in the study, or sort of address them. Like, of course, this data might be skewed because I come from XYZ background, right? But I think we need to set actually all of that aside. And for me, I think the major shift that has come with how we do data storytelling is does this data belong in the right hands? And what purpose is it for? Right. So, for example, data itself is not a problematic issue. It's in the context that it's living in, and that it makes it difficult, right? So if you are a researcher constantly looking into indigenous groups, what is it you're trying to achieve? Are you building your career as an academic? Are you adding to the public's understanding of this group of individuals? And also, is that information helping them materially, right? Not just like in adding to this consortium of knowledge pieces that understand them as a people, but does it actually benefit them materially? Does it change policies? Does it improve their lives? So on and so forth, right? So I think that is the part where it becomes problematic. In what context is research used for? Data collected, what context is it used for? And does it actually belong to the people that it is collected about? That's one. But also, are the people who are being studied involved in that project? In the sense of, do they also get the power to decide what questions are asked about themselves? And I think that is the critical thing.
You shared with me the example of how you did like a Orang Laut related project. Right? Maybe you can walk us through a bit of that example of how you did it as a way to apply all of these like big sounding ideas that you're talking about.
I just criticized a lot of academics who do studies on indigenous people, but I did it myself also. So for my dissertation at the University of Edinburgh, my project was essentially trying to understand how Orang Laut as a people are remembered in Singapore. Like in very general terms, that was my goal. And looking at memory as both an individual activity, a community-led activity, but also an institutional one. So I wanted to look at the museum to see how they have remembered Orang Laut, meaning what sort of items they have collected about them, and what does those items say about Orang Laut, and how does this differ from how Orang Laut see themselves. So I looked at the collection, National Collection of Singapore, which is this compilation of all the museums. And I observed that actually most of the items in there are photographs of Orang Laut, black and white photographs, right? Describing them, or describing mostly actually just the islands they live in, and not about them as a people. And like any commentary about them as a people was very like single sentence or a bit like thrown away sort of comment of like, okay, they are like a very simple people who just live in these fishing communities, right? There isn't much elaborated on them. But then these black and white photographs are taken of their islands, and that in these photos you can't actually see them in the photos. So it gives this impression of what we call terra nullius, like these are land without people. right? So it justifies their displacement. This is land that was empty anyway. No one lived there. Or if anyone lived there, they were these sort of low subsistence, not intelligent communities. That's the vibe, or that's the impression that you get by looking at the national collection.
Okay.
So when there were also items collected of Orang Laut, it's mostly just their fishing equipment, right? But when actually I showed this to, so I worked with Orang Laut Singapore, Fadal Sani, who was wonderful, and he facilitated a conversation with younger descendants, I would say, of people who hailed from these islands. And I got them to sort of look at these items and respond to it, and also tell me what do they see individually as important in their memory to keep. And it was very stories driven, right? It was very much like, oh, in the I growing up, my grandparents would give me this experience. They would insist we go out to sea. They would insist that we eat the seafood fresh as we catch it from the boat and eat it in the boat, and that taste is irreplaceable. Like you can't get it anywhere. You have to do it that way. And there's a lot of understanding of patience, about intuition of like, you need to be at sea to understand what is going on. You can't just it's not like a recipe book or a list of instructions of you sail to sea and then if you see these things, do A or do B, right? It's very much based on intuition.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of beliefs. I don't want to say superstition, right? Like cultural beliefs that have been honed over, we're talking about a group of people who have lived in these waters for centuries, right? So it's knowledge that has been honed over time and passed down from generation to generation orally and through these experiences. So their idea of memory is an embodied one. It lives in their bodies, right? And it's not written down in paper.
Yeah.
It's not data. As how we see it, right? Computerized knowledge, or even, documents or academic knowledge, right? So it's very much experiential based. So how then the answer is, how do we square the two? How do we then bring their sense of memory to where we are in the world right now, right? We live in this society that values that systemized form of knowledge. So how do we marry the two? I don't have an answer, but Kontinentalist is working on it with Orang Laut right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So someone listening might think of, okay, so is this about like a quantitative, qualitative kind of debate here? Is leftover colonial mentality the reason why there's general bias that the quantitative stuff is more valuable or more precise than qualitative?
So again, this is a comment on the remnants of, or rather I call the ghost of colonialism that continues to haunt us, which is what coloniality is really. But I think colonial knowledge or Western or scientific knowledge as we understand today, this desire for quantitative, is very much a desire for control and comprehension, right? So if we know something, we sort of can account for any uncertainties that might present with it, right? If we know something really well, if we know, the behavior of an animal really well, for example, we can begin to set certain predictions on it. They become predictable, they become knowable. Then we can maybe control it. We can maybe use it.
You can monetize it.
You can monetize it, right? So it comes from these areas. The desire to know comes from wanting to control and wanting to comprehend, which is also why we've done things like, distill whole societies, whole country to a single data point about their economics.
Yeah.
Like, oh, the GDP is at this number, or the social inequality is at this number. So we can begin to do something with it, right? So that is sort of the remnants of colonialism that affect us. And I think that is what's privileging the quantitative over the qualitative. Because the qualitative, you have to do a lot of work.
Yes.
And you have to be patient and sit with it.
Yeah.
And you have to live with uncertainty. You have to be like, yeah, I roughly know, but then also not really.
Yes.
There's still a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
And that drives people mad. Right, because then they have to give up that desire for control.
Yeah.
They have to give up and say, actually, I don't have all the answers. I have to be patient and give other people an opportunity, or give other situations an opportunity to show up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or I can't essentialize the people, right? Like today they might behave this way, but tomorrow they might be completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely making me want to talk about the whole impact measurement thing. But I want to close off your story of the Orang Laut project with, because you mentioned that working with Fidel left a very strong impression on you. Like you learned something really big from that.
Yeah. I think the main thing for me was I had to do my study from Edinburgh, and like the visa restrictions and all that as a student in the UK meant that I couldn't travel out of the UK very often. And that also meant that I couldn't come back to Singapore to conduct interviews in person. So it had to be done over Zoom. And in my initial plan was to be able to talk to the older descendants of the older Orang Laut people, so that they will maybe have still some memories of what it was like living on those islands, because a lot of the descendants today no longer have those visceral connections to the islands. They may have visited a couple of times. Some of them have lived on the islands, but most of them do not. So I really wanted to get a sense of what that was like. But Firdaus told me, first of all, these likely very often older individuals will be really uncomfortable with Zoom. Also, I don't speak their language. And also it's very much I'm going there with a list of questions lah. Yeah. So he said it won't be a meaningful activity. And I had to really reflect on it, because what he's actually preventing me from doing is an extractive exercise where I'm this stranger that comes to their community, ask them 10 questions, get my answer, and then publish a paper. But they don't actually benefit in any way later on, right? They probably never speak to me ever again, right? And it's very much one that also I would imagine messes with their minds when they have to sit there on Zoom and they won't be able to show you what is really important for them, right? So be it like maybe I have to be at sea with them to understand fully what they're saying, right? Also the language barrier, even if Firdaus is doing the translating for me, it's still a very broken, fragmented view of what they really want to say. I will never be able to comprehend that unless I speak their language, right? And some of us might have some understanding of this, thinking about if we are bilingual or trilingual or whatever, we will understand this, right? There are some expressions that can only be truly understood in the language, in the context of your own language and your own culture. So yeah, he essentially kept me out of it. And all I have to say, he did it very politely, but he didn't need to either. But I can imagine he receives requests like this all the time. Right. So it's really important that he did that to prevent them from being extracted from. But this is the same thing we do from everyone else also, and also very much the natural world. We do this of animals, we do this of plants. We do this in phone call surveys, right? You have this really troubling, I remember I had a really troubling conversation about the Trace Together survey and what I thought of it. And I could only respond through these very limited, frustrating questions and categories. But I had so much more to say, but that would never be captured.
Because the way the data gathering was already pre-structured around whatever they wanted to manage, not so much what was maybe more true of your experience.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of the listener who's okay, this all sounds really interesting, but it's so distant and far away from my work, right? And I wanted to work through maybe an example of say I'm a teacher, right? And I'm listening to this. And I don't really think of it as data, but the fact is I am extracting a lot of data out of say the bunch of primary schoolers that I am.
I mean, teachers gather data all the time.
Yeah, but they may not think of it as I'm a data gatherer and I'm data storytelling, but I think of okay, the teacher is data mining, I don't know, how did you do on your spelling on this week and this week and this week? And then I will tell a story of all of the marks that you got or didn't get, right? So say a teacher's okay, how am I supposed to do this better then? Right? Say they're just asking you a very straight up question. All right. So what's a more equitable way of doing this?
Okay, with the context of schools, it's a little trickier because also then it brings in the question of what is the purpose of education? Right.
Yeah.
And I to be very crude and blunt, the purpose of education in our society is set up so that children can grow up later in life to get a job and then be able to have economic provisions for themselves or for society. That is a very crude understanding of education. It's not actually about higher learning. It's not about being adaptable to life. It's not about being curious. Because if those were the goals, then the education structure wouldn't be set up. We would be teaching them how to iron their clothes and how to go out and wander and be street smart and things like that, right? But that's not what our education system is derive that.
Say the teacher goes like, no, you get me wrong. I really care about curious children and I want them to learn, right? And say they have an opportunity to track a different, to track a different set of outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? What would you invite them to consider tracking?
I mean, the very first thing I would say is I wouldn't even start with the presumption that there is a thing to track. Like the first thing I would start with is why not we ask the children first and foremost what they would like to bring to the table or what would they like to offer as something to be known about them that is outside of what's been taught in school. Or it could be taught in school too, but basically like set aside, tests, topics, subjects, and just really ask children like, what is important to you that you want me to know about you? Yeah.
And say like the dear teacher, like, okay, I'm gonna like, I asked all like 30, 40 of my kids, they came up all kinds of like weird stuff. Then is the invitation for the teacher to then look at all of the stuff and now start to put something together.
Yes, but also then I guess my question is like, is the teacher's goal to know every child? Or is the teacher's goal to put something together, like a summary, for someone else to understand the children?
So it's so that's your who is this
who
data
is this for?
Extraction for?
Exactly.
Is it extracted to give it back to the kids to help them?
That's right.
Or is it to help me and my career? Or is it to help my boss?
Yeah.
Or the principal that I report to?
Exactly.
And those would be the more like the interrogative questions that they would take on.
And those are the system questions that are hard, right? Because like I can say all of this now and then the teacher listening will be like, you say so easy. But then like, I have to deal with my HOD, I have to deal with my school principal, and I have to deal with MOE. And then like MOE has like all of these like plans and curriculums that we must set out. And the teachers are already so burnt out. Like we have to teach, then on top of teaching, we have to like mark and blah, blah, blah. And like totally, but those are like symptoms of the system problem.
Yeah.
And none of that actually is about like, what do the children want? What do students really want in their lives, right? And that is the sort of difficulty that, that the world is sort of described within now that is hard to challenge. Yeah. So I just want to say that I acknowledge that, right? So I think after all I've said, it's like, data is flawed, it is problematic, but it's not inherently a bad thing.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, what are you going to use that data for that is really important, and who has a hand in the creation of the data? So I think there are ways that, even though if collectively all the teachers in Singapore start to push up, right, collect data from children by asking children, what is it that you want to tell the government? What is it that you want to tell us?
Yeah.
Then if you start to float that upwards, there will come a system change, I believe. Like, that is different from what it is now. And it could be also that in maybe not in the context of students, but of minority groups especially, or groups that are severely disadvantaged, that data does become really important to them, because if they get the control of it and that data is legitimized through methodology, through process, through academic study, that becomes an information that the world, even as problematic as it is today, will listen to. That might make a material difference to how they live in their lives and their needs, right? Their community. So other countries have done this well. Like in New Zealand, there is this whole movement by the Maori around, they call it Maori data sovereignty, where they have their own perspective around data governance and data privacy and so on and so forth. And they are in the process of working that into law. So, they are like far more advanced than, Singapore at the moment on this conversation. But it is possible.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that data itself is bad. It's just how we look at it and how we use it that makes a difference.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because like we just feel so removed from this world, right? But actually we are like data workers. We just don't know it or acknowledge it. And I mean, it just makes me think of, say you're running a business or you are the person in charge of HR. And again, you may not necessarily think of like, I'm working on data and I'm doing data storytelling, but you are like extracting information or tracking certain information about, say, all of the employees in the company. And then I now have to write a story about it, or my boss will write a story about it. Right? And I guess the question would be like, who is this information for? Is it for the worker? And
exactly.
is it fed back to the worker to help them? or is it to allow the HR department or the company to control them?
Yeah.
Those are like big provocative questions.
They're really, really hard questions, but it takes a lot
Yeah.
of like, which is why, like I said, when I studied it, it like broke my brain a little, because you realize you might be in a situation where you are perpetuating certain stereotypes or certain frameworks that may not have necessarily served the people that you actually cared about.
Yeah.
But I do think, the part of this sort of understanding of decolonization is that there's no real, some people might really disagree with me on this, but my personal belief is that there is really no point sort of placing blame or to sort of say like, like, how can you do this? Like, how can you perpetuate these things? But more of like recognizing that people are not always intentionally ignorant.
Yeah.
They're not always intentionally like unawares of the system that they live in and how they, behave in it. But I think it's what matters is like when you do know what you do about it. And even then, recognizing that people are differently resourced and differently challenged, right? Like to take it upon an individual teacher to like change the system from within. It's like a really, really tall order. Like I don't expect that either. Like that's an impossible task in my opinion. But it's more of like, then how does that affect you as a teacher in the sense of how would you then behave differently in the classroom maybe? Yeah.
So I'm going to bring this to, I think, like the final phase of our conversation, which is the big impact measurement thing, right? Because like I mentioned that I feel sometimes like a bit of a data dummy. Like, I wouldn't classify myself as like, oh, I'm a data analyst or something, right? But by default of the project that I am running, this Common Ground Civic Center, actually there's been a lot of data extraction that we've had to do. And you as a resident partner has been part of our extractive process, right? And I think there's a lot to be learned here from anyone who's listening from a non-profit sector, or whether you're a funder or a practitioner or a steward like what we are playing in the Civic Center, where there's actually a lot of data that you're gathering, right? So I was wondering, like, if you were me, or if you were giving advice to me, right? I'm running a civic center. I have to track particular KPIs from a whole group, a whole community of different sorts of practitioners, right? And everyone's doing sort of like different forms of work, but I have to fit them all in like particular like buckets, right? So what would be your advice to me to do it in a way that is more aligned with your sort of like new approach to data?
I mean, I do have a lot of thoughts on this as somebody who's also been at the bottom end of that spectrum of like providing the data. I think the first question is, who is this data for, right? In the specific context of this case study that we live in, the data is for, I believe, the government to understand how practitioners behave, right? And this is for common ground as also sort of a bridge between the government and practitioners and a practitioner themselves. So the information has been skewed that way for that certain gain or that certain purpose. And it's actually not so much about practitioners communicating to each other of like, this is the KPI that worked for me and this is how I saw it and how I worked with it, and this might be useful to you, right? So it's not that context. So already the context is a little different. If I was doing this as a for practitioners study, then I would actually, instead of trying to standardize at the beginning, I would try and broaden it up as much as possible, because as you said, every practitioner, every resident partner, every organization is different. Their goals are different. Like if they were all sort of tracking the same thing, then actually I would be incredibly worried, because that means they're all doing the same thing and no one's trying to account for the little differences, right?
Everyone has to end up telling like a bit of a fantasy story or a bit of a, okay, fine, let me fit into your little category. And it doesn't fully capture the value of the work that they're doing.
Exactly.
And it doesn't aid in like making people more knowledgeable about how to support practitioners.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And I think for me, as somebody who has had to contribute to some of these KPIs, I think the one that was what feels the most frustrating is not knowing so fully like what this is going to. Like there is a certain opaqueness to that process in the sense that like, okay, I give these numbers every month, but what story does it actually tell about me? I don't know. You know, and I also don't see the fruition as a collective of like what these stories are told. Like I have a number, but the number doesn't really mean anything because I also know that the number changes from context to context, right? Like a very simple difference, for example, is a comparison between actually easily brave feats and like everyone else in the building. So brave feats work with, you know, the same group of students day in and out for a long period of time, right? So their goal is to understand the difference in those students over this period of time. And they have very specific metrics that they're looking at in individual students, right? But for Kontinentalist, that is we have a completely different audience. Our goal is to reach as many people as possible digitally and throughout events, right? So we are looking actually for more quantitative data in certain situations rather than qualitative, right? So like already there's like an inherent difference. So when you just look at the number of like, if a number is reported out of, these are the number of individuals that are experienced by practitioners. Like again, that doesn't actually tell you anything significant, right? But what you do want to know is, okay, for the people who have interacted with practitioners, did their opinions change from before and after, right? So like before they know about Kontinentalist, before they know about Green Nudge, before they know about Common Ground, what were their opinions like? And then after that, after they've interacted or after they've gone through an activity, what has changed for them? Like that is the difference you want to track, right? I mean, or rather I would want to track, right? And that's how we know whether or not practitioners are making a difference.
What was interesting about doing this project is to also get acquainted with how the social sector and the civic sector, I suppose, is evolving their approach to data. There is an acknowledgement in the more progressive, let's say, funders or progressive Black practitioners that actually, as if we're all working on pretty complex situations, which actually all practitioners in these sectors are working on complex stuff like, oh, how do you end poverty? How do you educate this kid? How do you like make sure we have more sustainable mindsets? These are actually incredibly hard to track, right? So there is a acknowledgement that it's actually quite hard to count and measure the things that are super valuable. And there is this movement to say, let's get the practitioner to report out the outcomes that are meaningful for them. And the whole point of collecting all of this data should be for learning and building up the knowledge base of the sector, rather than like sort of, well, we just need to like hit a certain number to make it look good, you know. But it's still not a mainstream approach though. One of the challenges that I'm thinking through is, how do you open a conversation with practitioners who are all different about like, do you want to learn from each other or not?
I mean, that's a fundamental question to ask. Do you even want to learn from each other in the first place?
Or do you just want to learn about yourself? You know, which is also valid. Like, is it like I want to learn about myself? Is it I want to learn about others? You know? Yeah, we've changed up like the kind of KPIs that we track. Like now in the last 3 years, we're having the practitioners still track whatever is like totally easy to track on their, you know, on their end. And then we as a steward practitioner will every quarter like sort of like do these more story-based, like we're going to come down, we're going to interview you. And through the interviews, hopefully float up from the practitioner, like what are the outcomes or what were the impact that was actually very meaningful for them. And have their voice in there. So it's a learning for us as well.
I think there is something that I want to challenge also a little bit in terms of like how we even frame. I mean, it's not just in this conversation, but a lot of things in Singapore that living abroad has also, like I lived a year in Edinburgh. I'm not saying Edinburgh is a, you know, significantly better society or a better place, but it has shown me that, you know, when you live outside of your own context for a while, you can see other perspective. And in Singapore, there's this constant search for growth. Also constant search or desire for improvement. Even when you are, like, I will just take myself for an example, like, for a long time, I love badminton. I love playing badminton, but I also love being terrible at it. Like, I
Okay.
don't want to take up badminton classes. I don't want to have to sign up for a lesson and improve my skill sets. I like just playing with my friends. I like the social nature of it. I like being able to play for an hour, laugh with my friends, sweat it out a little, and then go home and be done with it. Like, I have no desire at improving. I am happy being crap at it. And I'm happy playing it every week and still being crap at it, like lousy at it, But I think every time I tell people about this, they're like, oh, you should take up lessons, or do you want to do a gym membership, or, there's this like desire to make it better. Or like we also often that when somebody is really good at cooking, we'll be like, oh, you should start a shop, you should start a business, so on and so forth. And very often we just like cooking. Like we like cooking for our friends, we like cooking, we like experimenting, but we don't necessarily want to take a class or professionalize it or make it better, right? So even as practitioners, I think we need to pause and ask ourselves, is better always better? Like is it always important to improve? And if you search for the improvement, what do you potentially lose also in that process, right? Be it like an emotional one or a joy or so on and so forth.
I guess it's looking at which indicator do you believe equals better, right? So is it like only if you improve from grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3 badminton skill equals you have become better at it, as opposed to tracking, like I felt happier, and even happier with every time I showed up for badminton, and even though I'm crap at it, the indicator that I was tracking internally was actually how happy I still feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but there is almost an invalidation of like, is that indicator worth tracking or not, as opposed to the more mainstream ascend up like a skill ladder kind of thing. Yeah.
So I think like also my point is like we sort of have an assumption that practitioners want to learn from each other and that there is something to be learned. That's probably true for most practitioners, but I'm also sure there are many who may be in a very niche skill set or a very niche industry who say actually what I'm doing has been more than sufficient and happy to stay where it is, right? I'm just thinking of a like off the cuff analogy in my mind. Like when we think about maybe like a shoe cobbler, I know there's like an uncle around the corner that has sat in the corner like, for the longest time and just stays there, shows up, without fail every day, shows up, fixes people's shoes. He probably, he doesn't have a KPI for himself, or by the end of this month, I must like fix 10 more shoes than the month before. Like, people in the past don't have these weird metrics that we now apply to our world today, right? Like, is it okay? Are we okay with a practitioner or a nonprofit group or an organization to just help X number of people in that specific way? The same year in, year out, day in, day out, same thing, just like, for the foreseeable future. Like we need to also be able to live with that and say like, is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. Because the conversation that I definitely want to normalize in Singapore is this idea that there are many scale strategies, because the sector here is a bit fixated on like, if something is good, it should scale or it must scale. And by scale, they usually mean scale big, right? Scale big in your outreach, which also implies your organization needs to scale big and be even more complex as an organization, which is not everybody's like cup of tea or even their philosophy of how you create impact. Right? So no one goes to a mother and says, oh, you're so great at mothering, you ought to scale your mothering.
I mean, that's weird, right?
It would be weird because the mother will say like, I only want to mother my 2 kids, the end, and you don't go, you're such a failure, you didn't like have the ambition to go and like mother 500, right? So we don't say that. But in the social sector, there is a bit of that. And like, is it okay to say some people's strategy is scale big, and scale big things should be scale big, but some things are scale deep. Arguably, Uncle Cobbler sitting in one place for like 30 years is scaling deep, because his KPI, if you interview him, he say like, I like it when everybody recognize me, they happy, I happy.
That's something about the social sector and and community, right? Like I think for me, community is about consistency. It's about showing up all the time. And
Yep.
actually, when you do social impact work, especially when you work with, I would presume, low-income families, that consistency is really important. They don't actually want you to scale and then change your plans and policies all the time.
Yeah.
They want you to be predictable so that they can rely on you
Yeah.
to make plans in their other aspects of their life, right? So
Yes.
when whatever, for example, if you give them some sort of cash handout, and if you keep that cash handouts consistent for over a long period of time, actually then it becomes a reliable source of income for them. And then they can, plan ahead, right? But then if you sort of make that conditional on like, you need to do X, Y, Z to prove that you deserve this like amount over the period of time, that actually creates more instability and creates more uncertainty. And then that comes to a phase where actually they will be like, the effort versus payout is not worth it anymore because they
Yeah.
probably lose more. No, they don't have the words or language for it maybe, but they know that they will end up losing more, right? Through mental safety, through mental wellness, the distance that they have to travel
Yeah.
to achieve something, so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
those are some things that I think it's important to think about
Yes.
beyond the data lens, right? Like of like
Yeah.
a specific number, a specific growth metric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but this was like a deep, nerdy team conversation. Yeah, and I want to like bring this to I suppose like bring it to a close. It's a bit of a ... to be continued. Maybe we'll have like part 3, data, the revenge of data, right?
The Empire Rights Bank, as they say.
But yeah, like we just have to bring it to a temporary close. We're trying out like a couple of like new closing questions. So let's just see how you vibe with this, Pei. You're gonna go by instinct as you end this, right? So if you want to change something in Singapore, you have to ...
Oh,
Yeah,
I
it's
mean, I
hard.
have to say here that it is like today we are recording this on nomination day. So if you want to change Singapore, you have to run for politics.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, jokes aside.
Yeah.
I don't think we have to look too far. I think very much, this might sound a bit fluffy to many people, but I think it's very much an introspection that we will have to do. Instead of asking what you can do, maybe just sort of make a self-assessment of what are you already doing.
Yeah.
And again, avoiding the lens of necessarily having to improve, but maybe what can you do differently? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. And as you look around you at how people are approaching changing things up, what is a way that you see that you would, please don't do that because it just causes more brokenness or more fragmentation in the system? And conversely, what is the way that you prefer? Because it would be a more wholesome way to approach this. It helps us see people as whole.
Yeah. I think that one of the issues, or I think one of the patterns that I see, especially relevant to Singapore, is this desire of being right. I think there's a constant competition of who is more correct.
Yeah.
Or who is more right? And then I guess facts, data, and evidence becomes really critical to that conversation. But again, I think it's the same thing, right? Like if we let go of that desire for comprehensibility, or if we let go of that desire to search for affirmative answers or certain answers, and say actually we seek understanding as the goal rather than being correct, I think that opens many opportunities for dialogue rather than this sort of debate style of like back and forth, like see whose arguments are better or see whose perspective is more correct, right? So if we let that go for a while and just seek to understand, I think that would make society more whole, less fragmented.
No, I love it. It reminds me of like Brené Brown's like thing about I'm not here to be right. I'm here to get it right. Yeah. So I love that. And your final closing question: what is a community you feel grateful for?
Personally, I really am extremely grateful to my team. As I mentioned, I went away for a year. It was a really hard year. I had significant changes in my personal life as well.
Yeah.
And I think I used to be like, I mean, I still am a workaholic. So I was very present in my team, touching all aspects of the company and very involved in projects and so on and so forth. And when I went away, I must imagine it must have been really difficult for them. And there were many parts of times in the last year that also dealing with my broken mind in terms of like the work that we're doing in my personal life, they really, I think, carried a lot upon themselves.
Yeah.
But also they did it with so much grace
Yeah.
and so much understanding.
Yeah.
And also still like, they should have shown so much curiosity for also wanting to do it right.
Yeah.
Right. So not that they want to be right, but they have really like whatever I've shared with them about what I've learned in terms of like decolonization. And a lot of it is very interpersonal. It's about how you also treat people around you, their personal lives. And they've really taken that instruction or that challenge to, I think, its highest, right? So they're always in dialogue with each other also about like, how can we be more aware? How can we do things more responsibly? How can we be more ethical with our work? And they take that so seriously and so maturely, despite what people might say of a young team. So I'm really grateful for them, and I'm really, really proud of them as well.
Yeah, that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'll end this with, I'm going to practice a new ritual for myself too. Because every conversation I get to do is a gift. So I would like to practice like offering a gift back, right? To whoever I'm talking to. I think what you gave me in this conversation, and you always give me this.
I have a lot of opinions.
You give me a lot of challenge, energy, vitality because of that. It always keeps me on my toes, and I love it because it puts me in a learning space, and I am very grateful for how you have the strength to push through your convictions, and you're prepared to be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's very big 8 energy.
Yes, big Enneagram 8 energy, and I resonate with that as a 5.
Don't need to pick fights, just fight them all.
Fantastic.
But I also, thank you for being so open and also as, curious about, what we do and for being so accepting of different opinions as well.
No, that's where our strengths are, in our differences. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.